Tom Coburn is a senator from Oklahoma. He served 2 terms from 2005 to 2015, representing that great state. He's now the senior advisor for the Convention of States Project and joins us now. Senator Coburn, thanks for joining us, and happy Thanksgiving, sir.
Well, same to you, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, you keep hearing people say, well, we're about to have divided government here with the Democrats in the House and the Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House. I mean, you had to deal with that quite a bit during your tenure, didn't you, this divided government idea?
Yeah, we had divided government for most of the time I was in the House. We had President Clinton, and then we had divided government all but 2 years I was in the Senate.
You know, when the Constitution was first ratified, there were no political parties, actually. But by design, they sort of wanted there to be divided government, not political party divisions, but the chambers, 2 chambers of Congress, the legislative branch, and then the judicial branch and the executive branch. So that there should be division in government, shouldn't there, Senator?
Yeah, there should be. The problem is we've created factions, and our founders talked a lot about that, where it's about one party versus the other, one group versus the other, and they said that was the way to destroy a republic, and I think we're kind of seeing that right now. The other thing is our founders never intended for the federal government to have the role it has today. You know, where should the decisions be made? They all said they should be made closest to the people. And with the 17th Amendment, what we did was eliminate that and move all the power to Washington.
Yeah. And I remember when you know, the last time we had a big turnover in the House was in 2010. John Boehner and the Republicans came in and knocked Nancy Pelosi out of there. And they ran on some principled ideas, Senator Coburn. You know, we're going to rein in the size of government. We're going to lower taxes. We're going to lower spending. And we're going to go back to regular order. None of these continuing resolutions anymore. We're going to have budgets. We're going to have appropriations. What happened there, Senator Coburn? Because it's still out of control. All those things are out of control.
Well, I think what happens is what you normally see happen with politicians, is they say one thing and do another. And what we lack is statesmen in both parties. I left because I saw no path forward for us fixing our problems in Washington, and I know that's pretty dour as well. About it, 60% of the majority of each state's budget is now controlled by an unelected bureaucrat in Washington. So even your state legislature doesn't get to decide. And to me, the big question is...
Whoop, did we lose Senator Coburn?
Yes.
Oh, Senator Coburn, you're in a dead spot in your cell right there. I don't know what happened.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. You're back. All right.
Okay. Did our founders intend for all the decisions to be made in Washington, or did they really decide for the states to be what they were supposed to be, is laboratories of freedom and the core principles protected by the federal government, but most of the decisions made somewhere else.
Well, and that brings us to the Convention of the States. And, of course, Mark Levin, who comes on right after me at 6 p.m., has been a huge proponent of this. He's written about it in Liberty Amendments. Just as a quick refresher, Convention of the States is in Article 5 of the Constitution. And if 2/3 of the states decide that they want to call for a constitutional convention, they can. And then anything that's decided there has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Did I get that right?
That's right, but it's a very limited convention because you can only talk about what you're applying for. So there's no risk with it as far as what we hear our opponents say a runaway.
Right. A lot of people, that was my first question. A lot of people say, oh, great, you get this convention and it's going to be populated by Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren types, and we're going to overturn our way of life. But tell me what the safeguard is against that.
Well, number one is you can't bring up something that's not in the application. And if you do, you'll get shouted down with a point of order. But if you override the point of order, the Congress will never send it to the states because it's outside the bounds legally of what the application was that you were making for the things you wanted to change.
So in other words...
That's all about trying to defeat what we're doing and not fix what's going on with our country.
Go back to the application, because I don't think people quite get that. When you actually propose the idea of a convention of the states, you have to specifically say what you're going to be convening about. Is that what you mean?
Right. And we have 3 subject matters. One is fiscal responsibility, like a balanced budget and general accepted accounting principles. 2 is limitation on the scope and jurisdiction of the government to restore the Commerce Clause back to what it was, and the other areas of breach that the federal government has overreached. And then finally, term limits of both elected and appointed officials.
And right now, how many states have agreed to this?
12. We'll probably, I think, get 2 more this year in lame duck sessions. And then I think we'll get 6 next year. So we'll be at 20. We'll be well over 50%.
That's impressive. So 50, in other words, 50% of the 34 needed.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I think that the real thing people ought to understand, I'm 70 years old, so I've actually seen this real change in decision-making taken away from the states and placed in the hands of agencies and courts, which was for the intention. Most of the controversial issues that face our country today are decided in 5-4 decisions of the Supreme Court, and our founders never wanted that.
Well,
what they wanted was those decisions made in the state.
Yeah.
So if you want to have gay marriage in Oklahoma or pot, we'll have it. And if somebody doesn't want to have it, that's fine.
Well, let me ask you this. Another objection that I think has some merit to it is that our first constitutional convention, it was presided over by George Washington, and some of the key speakers there were Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. We don't have those guys walking amongst us anymore, Senator Coburn. Who decides who gets to be a delegate from each state, and who makes those decisions, or does each state get to decide that in their own way?
Each state decides that in their own way. Most of the time, they're called commissioners, and the states will appoint as many of them as they want, but each state only gets 1 vote.
And so, like, for instance, here in Virginia and Maryland, we've got Republicans in Virginia and Maryland, but as you very well know from your experience in Oklahoma and in D.C., there are one kind of Republican and another kind of Republican. And so just because you get Republicans going on behalf of your state, they may not necessarily be the voices that you want. They may take it in the wrong direction.
They can only take it in one direction, yes for the 3 subject matters or no for the 3 subject matters.
I see.
They don't get the opportunity to go outside of that. And they'll be enjoying. Here's the safety feature. Number one is there's at least 13 states with common sense left. That's number one. I mean, you just think about it. And
yeah.
You hear these claims that the original Constitution was a runaway. Well, only one state didn't follow exactly what they were told to do, and that was Massachusetts. And when they got home, the Assembly told them they had done the right thing.
Yeah.
New York didn't vote. Alexander Hamilton didn't get a vote.
Yeah.
Rhode Island didn't vote. So all this stuff about they did exactly what they were told to do, and it's worked rather well, except for the last 40 years.
So as we're speaking with Senator Tom Coburn, a former senator from the state of Oklahoma and now senior advisor on the Convention of States project. And this is becoming a little more immediate now, I think, because we're going to have Nancy Pelosi running the House, and we're going to have some issues where we're not going to see the House and the Senate getting together on much here, Senator Coburn.
Yeah, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, you hear all this talk right now. The goal of the career politician is to never make a hard vote. I mean, I spent 16 years in Washington and watched it. It doesn't matter what party they're in. They don't ever want to cast a hard vote because they might have to defend that. And they love being in Washington.
And by the way, now we're also seeing in this, I'm trying to think of what we can get done in this lame duck session. Maybe we'll fund that border wall. Maybe we'll make some fundamental reforms, while the Republicans still have the majority. According to the Heritage Foundation, the Budget Committee is actually contemplating changing the way they go about business so that they only pass a budget every 2 years. Am I reading that right? Because it's been too hard for them to come up with a budget?
No, it's not too hard. Actually, the thought behind that, while I was there, is that you'd spend the next year not doing anything but nothing except oversight, right?
Oh, I see.
Except they never do oversight.
Right.
Or any significant. There are a few, maybe 5% of the members of Congress want to do oversight. That's the only way you control spending. And so they may go to a biannual budgeting, but if you don't do the oversight, and they're certainly not doing it by the Republicans now, and the Democrats certainly won't, it'll all be political in nature rather than fiscal in nature. And so what's going to happen is you're not going to do anything except spend more time with the politics, the factions. And we just lack real leadership. We lack virtue. I mean, on both sides, we lack structural leadership that says, I'm going to honor the virtues that made this country great. And that's being frugal, that's being accountable, that's being transparent, and that's obedient to the original Constitution. not the 8,000-page one we have now.
So let's go through these again real fast. Right now, the 12 states that have ratified this or have passed the call for an Article 5 convention, right. What are the three issues that they want addressed again?
Fiscal responsibility.
And what does that mean exactly?
How do we end up $21 trillion in debt and $144 trillion in unfunded liabilities that our kids are never going to be able to pay for?
Right.
All right, that's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is limit the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government back to what it was intended to be. You know, I'll never forget reading Thomas Jefferson answering a guy who was questioning him building the University of Virginia. When the guy asked him, why didn't you go to Washington and get money? He said, you'd have to have an amendment to the Constitution for the federal government to be involved at all in education. and yet we're failing in education in our country. We know what we don't want to hear as students. We're not old enough to know that. But that's the most important thing. It's not about free speech anymore. It's not about history and knowing history so you can make good decisions in the future. It's about what satisfies me and my short-term desires.
So as a conservative Republican...
The point is limiting the role of the federal government back to what it was intended to be.
When I hear you say that, to me that means get out of the business of education. Get out of the business... I mean, there's 15 things I could list that the federal government's doing that get out of healthcare, get out of all of these things. Is it specified there when you say limit the size and scope of the federal government, or is it open for discussion? Because some Elizabeth Warren person might show up and say, yeah, well, I think they should limit the size and scope of the federal government, like get them out of national defense.
That's fine, and so all you have to have is 26 votes to get that, and there's nobody stupid enough to think that that's going to happen.
All right, okay.
So the hard left and the hard right, what we want to do is go back to the common sense, virtues, and principles of our founders. And when I say limit the scope and jurisdiction, that means to restore it to what it was intended to be. It's not anything new. The federal government wasn't supposed to tell farmers how they do everything.
Right.
It wasn't supposed to tell you how you teach in your school. The local school districts and the parents and the teachers were supposed to decide that, not some bureaucrat from Washington. You'll be surprised to know there's 54 teacher training programs run by the federal government.
How many?
54.
50?
Different, separate ones, and only about 12 of them are run by the Department of Education.
It's insane. It's insane.
I mean, it is, the whole federal government's insane in terms of the way it's expanded and what it's not held accountable.
Well, and the way we see, even when a president or a legislative body tries to correct those things, we now see judges step up and say, oh, you can't do that, because Democrats just take it to court to try to stop the actual process of legislating and executive leadership. So is there anything that will address that and how the courts have become too omnipresent in these decisions?
The way you do that is to restore the original definition of the Commerce Clause. That's what gives the federal government agencies the power to reach into the state and tell legislators what they will and won't do.
All right. And again, everyone, I see these from conservatives who will step up and say, all we need is, a movement in this convention, this Article 5 convention, to abolish the Electoral College, and then we're all screwed.
Well,
that's not going to happen.
First of all, anything that comes out, that's not even within the scope of the application. So that isn't going to happen. That's number one. Number two is it'll never get 26 votes. And number three is that even if it got 26 votes, even if it was outside the scope, the Congress would never send it to the states because they didn't enjoy it because it was outside the application.
Right. And even if they did that...
Everybody can say anything they want to try to scare people. Our country was built on courage, not on fear.
Yeah. And by the way, one step further...
I'm sick and tired of hearing people say, here's why we can't do this. We better do something fairly quickly or we're not going to have a country to worry about.
All right. Well said, sir. Where should people go if they want to support this convention of the states? I can't remember. Virginia took this up, I thought, but they have not gone through with it yet, have they?
Virginia has not passed it.
Right.
I doubt that they will. Because if you want a socialist federal government, you don't want to limit the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. Mm-hmm. And the real question, again, is who gets to decide? People in Washington, unelected judges, bureaucrats, or your state legislature and you? So the way you find out about this is go to conventionofstates.com, and you'll see a list of frequently asked questions, and everything you could ever think to ask about this is answered in a common sense way that proves the point that everybody that's opposed to this and wants to try to fix it another way doesn't have a leg to stand on. And here's what I tell people, last point. You got a better way to restore our country and secure the future for our children? I'm all in. Tell me it.
Senator Tom,
nobody gives you an answer.
No, you don't get anything. Senator Tom Coburn, we got to leave it there. As you know, Mark Levin talks about this often, and he comes on at 6 p.m. I wanted to address it in some detail here as well with you, and I appreciate you joining us.
Well, I appreciate the time.
Terrific.
Our country is worth saving. Our kids are worth it, and we can cheat history.
By the way, Sooners over West Virginia on Friday?
Of course.
What a great 2 days of football you're going to have, Senator Coburn. You got your Redskins playing the Cowboys in what will be a miracle win down in Dallas with our new starting quarterback, Colt McCoy. Yeah. I know it's hard for you as a Sooner to root for a long
I loved watching Washington come back with their quarterback. It's a shame he got his leg broken.
And then you got your Sooners on Friday. And then if you're still wanting some more, we got that little Michigan-Ohio State game on Saturday for you.
Well, we also got Oklahoma State TCU, and I'm an alum of both OU and OSU, so I got to root from both.
Wow, you really covered your bases there in Oklahoma when you were running for office. You got both schools.
And I delivered 4,000 babies, and that didn't hurt either.
Senator Coburn, right, you just keep delivering voters eventually.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Coburn. Always good to talk to you, and happy Thanksgiving.
Go to conventionestates.com, press the button, sign the petition. More importantly, get 10 of your friends to do the same. When you sign the petition, then that sends a letter to your state legislator. You go on the list in their district as a supporter. We deliver those lists to the state legislators. It means something to them.